Hello and welcome back, and you know what time it is. It's time for another Before You Buy, the video where we talk about a new network attached storage system, and I give you 5 reasons why I think you really should consider it as your next big data storage purchase, and 5 reasons why you might want to give it a miss. Let's crack on with number 1. Let's be honest, it's probably one of the main reasons you've started looking at a Synology system like this. The sheer scale of storage. It's got 12 bays of SATA-based storage connectivity inside there. Think of the standard of SATA storage these days. We're seeing SATA drives starting to arrive on the scene at 22 terabytes at time of recording. 22 terabytes of storage on this 12 bay here. Now, of course, things ain't so straight and narrow when it comes to the drives you can use in this system, and most certainly you're going to hear that later in the video. But for now, 12 bays of storage in such a compact chassis is, for me, still something incredibly important. And also, additionally, the way this system is architecturally built inside, for 12 bays of storage to be so well maintained in such a relatively compact chassis is still really impressive to me overall. Continuing to dig down into that subject of storage there, which, let's face it, is going to be a running thing when it comes to a big boy like this, it's Synology Hybrid RAID, SHR. It is a feature that a lot of people, it's formed kind of the tipping point on why they've gone for a Synology NAS. Yes, the software is good. Yes, there's upgradability. Yes, there's lots of apps for your Windows or your mobile or whatever system you've got. But Synology Hybrid RAID is their own fluid and flexible RAID system that's available in the entirety of the Synology Plus series and below. And below is the key word there, because if you go to the XS and the enterprise level stuff, they don't include SHR. This system manages to give you this amount of storage and still include SHR. But I know a number of you are scratching your head and thinking, what the hell is SHR? Let me enlighten you. So when you've got a bunch of drives inside any NAS system, generally you're going to have to worry about data loss in the event of one of those drives breaking, as well as wanting to make sure you've got the largest amount of available capacity at any time and the best performance. Now, the resolution for all of these questions is answered in RAID, redundant array of independent disks, or redundant array of inexpensive disks if you're old like me. Now, what that does is it combines multiple drives into one large blob of storage. That storage, more often referred to as a pool, can then be provisioned out in the case of most file systems into individual volumes. Now, those large blobs of storage within a RAID combine all the drives, but also take advantage of multiple reading and writing actions of all of the drives at once to enhance the performance, but also include something called redundancy. Now, redundancy is when you can withstand the loss of a drive. It's a little bit more, I've explained that in a bit of a caveman way, but long story short, you have all your drives in there, and depending on the level of RAID that you go for, the amount of protection from drive failure you have as a safety net will increase. Things like RAID 1 or RAID 5 give you 1 drive of redundancy. In the case of RAID 6 or RAID 10, you can technically withstand up to 2 drives of failure there. And again, that redundancy is incredibly important, but RAID is not as perfect as it might be. And RAID, although it allows you to combine lots of drives, it will always class every visible drive as the smallest available drive. So in the case of this 12 bay, if you populated, let's say 10 of these bays with 10 terabyte drives, and you put 1 TB drives in the top of this, trust me, I know you're not going to do that, but hear me out, it would still see all of those 10 TBs as 1 terabyte each, because it will class every drive by the smallest available drive in the array. SHR, on the other hand, allows you to mix drives. So in that scenario where we had 8 10 TB drives and 4 1 TBs, SHR requires 1 of the largest available drives worth of redundancy. So in other words, it will only need 10 terabytes of redundancy, and then it combines all of the other available storage, which in this case would be 74 terabytes, and allows you to use it. So again, that fluid RAID system is something that's really only available from Synology right now. Some brands are working on alternatives like TerraMaster, but again, not to the same established level. Now, why would anyone mix and match drives? No one's actually going to go out and populate a system with 8 10 TB drives and 4 1 TBs. I'm not that much of a moron, but you might buy a 12 bay system like this, partially populate it on day one with, say, 6 drives, and those 60 drives might be 4 TB each. And then 3 or 4 years later, you want to add some more storage in there. SHR will then allow you to, given the price of hard drives changing and therefore bigger drives costing even less, meaning you could populate these with 12 TB drives, and SHR would allow you to combine all those drives and take advantage of the larger storage, whereas a traditional RAID would have left you to either have to create a completely independent storage pool with the new drives, or force you to class those drives as smaller capacity, or limit you to only buying the same capacity years later. It's a great little system that also allows you to attach expansions onto NAS systems and more smoothly distribute and add to data services, but that's a whole different topic. But for now, SHR on a big NAS like this, mwah. Next up, let's talk about memory, because this system does arrive with quite unique memory inside. To put it into perspective, inside this system, it arrives with a quad-core AMD Ryzen based processor, which is all fair and well. However, it also arrives with 4 gig of memory. That 4 gig of memory can be upgraded to a maximum 32 gig, which again, all fair and well, all pretty good stuff. However, the memory inside this system is 3200 megahertz frequency, or in other words speed, and that memory module there is ECC, error correcting code. That means that as data passes through that memory module, it is checked at the entry and exit point, and if there's any inconsistencies due to performance problems or just overwork or just too many file volume and not enough file performance, or vice versa, ECC will correct that data. It heals as it passes through, and the result is that it ensures that any small inconsistencies that can lead to data corruption on such a large data storage solution like this are avoided. And remember, that is ECC and 3200 speed frequency memory there, so that is some great combination. It's expensive memory, but still some great memory to have inside such a large scale storage solution like this. While we're continuing to dismantle this NAS, let's talk about its ventilation, because this system has several nice little key factors that I like in terms of keeping temperatures as low and efficient as possible. Bear in mind, with 12 bays of storage inside this system, it's going to get hot. It's going to get real hot. It's going to potentially get dusty, and over time that can lead to the system maybe getting a little too hot and a little less efficient. So, as mentioned earlier on in the video, despite this being a 12-bay storage system, the actual storage is incredibly well maintained. Inside there, you can see on one side all of those storage bays with an enormous cavity there in the middle for airflow. There's lots and lots of space there for the air to be passing through. On top of that, the rear of the system has those 2 rear cooling fans right there. And these 2 fans here, which will be automatic but can be played with manually, can also be removed for maintenance purposes when the system's in operation. Something that's not really available in any other desktop NAS from Synology. You can remove the module, clean it, do what you need to do, and then reinstall the module as needed. Sorry, that's so close to the microphone. And then reinstate it, pop it back in, and boom, you're good to go. Again, the amount of cooling and passive and active airflow in the system, all the way down to these panels being partially ventilated there, all of that assists in trapping dust, ensuring air passes over the drives and the internal components, and keeps the system as cool and efficient as it needs to be at this scale. Further still, while I've got my screwdriver on the table, let's talk about that PCIe expansion slot. That's right, this system also allows you to add further upgrades via PCIe via this slot here at the top, which is a PCIe Gen 3 x8 slot. Now, on the face of it, a number of you may be looking at other NAS systems that have better network ports, or looking at systems that have other benefits in terms of M.2 storage and thinking, well, this system should have those by default. Well, this system at least has the option to add those. And if you look at the rear of the system here, just in that top corner there, you can see that PCIe slot. That allows you to add multiple 10GBE ports on this system. So with each 10G port, you're adding a potential 1000 megabytes per second, which on a 12 bay in the right RAID, you're going to get that. Next, you can look at fiber channel cards, like the 25G card from Synology, which is a 2-port 25 GBE, so a potential 50 GBE gigabit Ethernet there potential for this system. Of course, then 12 bays is not going to cut it at all. And then, of course, you've got things like this card here, which is the combo card, which has a 10 GBE port and 2 M.2 NVMe ports. That can go in this system, and then boom, you've not only got M.2 NVMe slots inside there for caching, but you've also got 10 GB out, thereby enhancing performance even more. There's a lot of scalability in this system and a few little upgrade options along the way, but is it perfect? I'm afraid not. Let me talk you through 5 reasons why you might want to give this system a miss. So first up, let's face it, you knew I was going to address this. I generally always do. 1 GBE. Why does this system still arrive with 1 gigabit Ethernet? I know there's counter arguments. 2.5 GBE is by no means as mainstream as 1 GBE right now, and most users think, why would I go 2.5 GBE when I can hop, skip and a jump up to 10 GBE? But there are so many systems arriving these days with 2.5 gigabit Ethernet at the same cost as 1 GBE. I think this system not having it still counts slightly against it in my eyes, particularly when it is a 12 bay storage system. Yes, you can link aggregate them to get up to 4 GBE, but I think most users looking at this 12 bay system are going to be considering a 10G upgrade very early on. So the idea that they could have included at least one 2.5 GBE port on this system seems in 2022 the least of my expectations. Next up, I sort of touched on this earlier on, why hasn't this system got M.2 NVMe SSD bays by default? Earlier on you heard me mention that you can use this upgrade card to add M.2 NVMe bays onto this system. However, there are loads of Synology NASs out there that already feature them by default. Indeed, the 6 and the 8 bay versions of this system arrive with M.2 NVMe slots inside. Hell, the 920 and the 720 and the 420 all arrive with M.2 NVMe slots. And given that Synology is making a big song about DSM and its caching abilities and the advantages of SSD caching, I'm really surprised that this system is one that doesn't have that feature by default already built in. Synology, why? Is it a PCI lane issue? Is it that they're centering things towards another direction? I'm not sure. It just feels to me like, despite this system having 12 bays of storage, the idea that I've got to go extra to get the M.2 NVMe bays, for me, makes it a little bit less than some of the 8 bay systems out there, like the 1821 Plus. Hooey, this is the big one. Let's face it, a number of you that have been looking at a Synology like the DS2422 Plus or the one slightly above it must already know about this. Synology has slightly changed its position on compatibility on their enterprise level solutions. Now, this is to do with lots of factors, mainly because Synology have now started producing their own hard drives. Their own hard drives here, which are Toshiba drives, available currently in 4, 8, 12 and 16 TB drives. These drives are enterprise class drive, 550 terabyte workloads. They've got 7200 RPM performance in as high as 272 megabytes per second, I believe. A whole bunch of onboard cache. They are big, bold drives and arriving at a similar price point to Pro Series drives, which have got less of a workload limit, less of a performance, and again, they are great drives, priced arguably, when you can get them, quite well. So why am I putting this in the negative aisle? Well, that's because Synology, after producing these drives in the 2022 Enterprise and Big Business and Above series, decided to list the majority of other drives such as Seagate Iron Wolf, WD Red, Ultrastar, Exos, and indeed Toshiba as non-compatible. And if you do use these drives, then your system will display a warning message during its utilization. And on several occasions, the Synology DSM system will say to you, you are using unsupported drives. Now, what that means is, if something goes wrong with your system, Synology state that if that issue can be derived from the drives you've used, which is still pretty unlikely, let's be honest, they're not going to be able to support your warranty. Additionally, when people utilize these systems, Synology's promises and guarantees on what it can do are based on their own drives. And therefore, if you use other drives, Synology say it makes it very difficult for them to support that maximum performance or ability threshold when you're using unsupported systems or systems that they've not tested on. Now, there's a big grey area here, given that Synology allow and support third-party drives on a number of their other non-high-end business excess business class systems. But the fact this is a Plus series box, so technically in the same family as the DS920 and 220 and the 6 and the 8 bay I've already mentioned, yet this one has hard drive compatibility minimized, is going to be a real off-putting factor for people. Now, it's worth highlighting in DSM 7.1, Synology have allowed pretty much all of the storage features of DSM to be available to even third-party drives. They even removed a notification that said critical instead of warning, but for many that's still not quite enough, and it still seems like Synology has this message on screen if you're using those unsupported drives that if you are installing this professionally for a customer or a client, you may be slightly concerned that they may call you a day later and go, this system's saying that you've used unsupported drives and it's saying warning, which a lot of IT installers and IT admins aren't going to be a big fan of. Just a minor one here, it involves these little USB 3 ports here at the top. Mainly my criticism is, what the hell are you supposed to do with them? Because in this 12-bay system, having USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports at 5 gigabits per second even now feels weirdly arcane. USB 3.2 Gen 2 at 10 gigabits per second is a great deal more available and allows up to 1,000 megabytes per second throughput with a connected storage drive. And this one with its 5 gigabits per second connection there means even if you use an external SSD, you're never going to exceed, 450, maybe 500 megs at the top end. And also, given that this is a 12-bay system, this 12-bay system, that is a huge amount of throughput and data. Now, if you are connecting an external drive to this, whether you're backing up on one way or the other, that's going to be quite a limiting bottlenecking factor there in the middle, particularly if you're going to be utilising a larger scale localised backup drive as another tier to your backup strategy next to NAS to NAS, NAS to cloud, and you wanted to add a localised NAS to USB. Now, if you do that with this system, you're going to have a slower transfer rate, but moreover, carrying on talking about this USB port here, you can't use it for much more anymore. There used to be that you could attach Wi-Fi adapters, Bluetooth adapters, you could attach digital TV tuners, you could attach printers, scanners and more. Most of those things aren't compatible anymore in DSM 7.1. UPSs are, and external storages, and there's a small number of adapters and things that you can add to it, but it's very small indeed. And although the kind of homebrew GitHub community have knocked together some patched drivers to allow things like 2.5 and 5 GBE USB adapters to be used, there's still no guaranteeing that they're not going to be completely undone the next time you do a firmware update. So again, I include these USB ports on here mainly so I hope Synology start rolling out bigger, faster and more featured USB ports moving forward. This final point harks back all the way to when I reviewed the DS2622 XS Plus right at the start of 2022, and it's simply that this system, when they released both of those 12 bays at the same time, I think it would be fair to say that this thing got completely overshadowed. It's a real shame because it is a good unit, and the DS3622 XS Plus that this thing seems to live in the shadow of costs more than $1,000 more. So why would this system live in the shadow of something that costs you an extra grand? Well, nice and simple. The 3622 XS Plus has got 5 years of warranty. It's got a quad-core Xeon processor, not an AMD Ryzen embedded one there. It's got 16 gig of DDR4 ECC memory as well. But moreover, it's got two 10 gigabit Ethernet ports on the rear. So you've got 20 gigabit of external output. So once you price up all of those extras, from the additional 2 years of warranty, to the additional memory, remember we talked about memory earlier on, to the far higher performing processor, to the inclusion of two 10 GBE ports, and the ability to expand the core system with 2 expansions, not just 1. You end up with a system with a little bit more future proofing in it, and suddenly that $1,000 or so, once you span it out over the years, does not equate to a great deal. Hence why this system, as good as it can be, still lives in the shadow of the 3622 XS Plus. And if you can afford it, it's still potentially a better option. But those have been the 5 reasons why I would recommend the DS2422 Plus, and 5 reasons why perhaps you should remain on the fence a little bit longer. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Click like if you have. It really helps me understand what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. Click subscribe if you want to learn more about this subject, not just this NAS, but data storage in general. We make a video every day and we cover pretty much everything in data, and use the free advice section over on NAS Compares, linked below, to if you need help from a free tech expert, myself or Eddie. It's completely free. There's donate buttons. Use them, ignore them. It's up to you. It might take us a day or so to answer your inquiries, but we do answer every single one. It just takes us a little bit longer because we're humans with lives.